Amazon offered $10 billion for this company. The founder said no. Then another company reportedly offered him a similar amount, and he said no again. Today, that same company is worth a tiny fraction of what it once was. One decision could have made its founder one of the richest entrepreneurs in tech. Instead, it became one of the most dramatic collapses in internet history. And what's strange is that when he rejected those offers, almost everyone eventually agreed with him. For years, it looked like he had made the smartest decision of his life. Until suddenly, he hadn't.
Because this isn't just the story of Wish. It's the story of a founder who became convinced he was building the future of shopping. Investors believed it, customers believed it, even Amazon believed it. But hidden inside the company was a flaw so dangerous that it would eventually destroy everything. And the craziest part? The warning signs were there from the very beginning. To understand what happened, we need to go back before Wish was famous, before the weird ads, before the fake products, before millions of people started making fun of it online. Back when it was just one engineer with a very unusual idea. His name was Piotr Szulczewski. Before founding Wish, he worked at Google, and unlike most startup founders, he wasn't trying to reinvent shopping. He was trying to understand people. More specifically, he wanted to understand why people clicked on things. At Google, he helped build advertising systems designed to predict what users might be interested in. Today, that sounds normal. Every app on your phone seems to know exactly what you want. But back in 2010, this kind of technology was still incredibly valuable. Because if you can predict what someone wants to click, you can make a lot of money. Investors understood this immediately, and one of those companies was Facebook. According to reports, Facebook offered around $20 million for the technology. Most founders would have accepted instantly. Think about it. You're a young entrepreneur. You have one product. A giant company wants to buy it. You become rich overnight. Game over. But Piotr refused. At the time, many people thought he was crazy. What they didn't realize was that Piotr wasn't trying to build software. He was trying to build something much bigger. And his next move was so strange that it almost sounds like a joke. Instead of creating an online store, he created a website where people couldn't buy anything. No checkout button, no payment system, no shopping cart. Nothing. Users could only browse products and save them to a wish list. That's it. Imagine launching an e-commerce company where nobody can actually purchase anything. It sounds ridiculous. But then, something unexpected happened. People loved it. Users spent hours scrolling through products. They weren't buying, they weren't spending money, they were just browsing. And the more they browsed, the more data Wish collected. At first, Piotr thought people would use the site to organize future purchases. Instead, he discovered something much more important. People enjoyed browsing almost as much as buying, maybe even more. And that observation changed everything. Because if people were willing to spend hours scrolling through products they couldn't even purchase, what would happen if they actually could? Piotr decided to find out. He started contacting manufacturers directly. Most of them were located in China. His pitch was simple. Wish would bring them customers. Lots of customers. In return, they would offer products at incredibly low prices. To his surprise, many agreed. And almost overnight, Wish transformed from a strange wish list website into something much bigger, an enormous online marketplace. The prices looked unbelievable, sometimes impossibly low. Products that appeared to cost $50 elsewhere were available for $10, sometimes $5, sometimes even less. Customers couldn't believe what they were seeing, and that's exactly what made the platform so powerful. Because Wish wasn't competing with Amazon, it wasn't competing with Walmart, it wasn't competing with anyone. It was creating an entirely different experience. Shopping on Wish felt less like buying products and more like playing a game. You never knew what you would discover next. One moment you'd see a phone charger, the next you'd see a miniature submarine, then a laser pointer, then a drone, then something so bizarre you couldn't help but click on it. And every click made the algorithm smarter. The more you used Wish, the better it became at keeping you engaged. That was the real product. Not the items, not the discounts. Attention. And for a while, attention was all Wish needed. The company exploded. Millions of users became tens of millions. Tens of millions became hundreds of millions. Investors poured money into the company. Valuations kept increasing. Everything seemed perfect. But there was. there was one thing almost nobody noticed. The algorithm wasn't optimizing for purchases. It was optimizing for attention.
And those two goals are very different. A customer who buys something is valuable. A customer who keeps scrolling is also valuable. But those aren't always the same person.
And that distinction would eventually become a massive problem. At first, though, nobody cared, because growth was absolutely insane. Every year, Wish seemed to become bigger. More downloads, more users, more products, more headlines. And then something happened that made the company's rise almost impossible to ignore. The ads started appearing everywhere. If you were online during the 2010s, you probably remember them. The weird Wish ads. The ads became so famous that people started making entire YouTube videos about them. A chicken helmet, a cat face mask, a gadget nobody could identify, a product that looked completely fake. People laughed at them, people shared them, people made memes about them. And that's exactly why they worked. Most companies create advertisements designed to convince people to buy. Wish discovered something much more powerful: curiosity. Because when someone sees an advertisement that's completely normal, they ignore it. But when they see something bizarre, they stop scrolling. And that's all the algorithm wanted. 1 second of attention, 1 click, 1 reaction. The stranger the product looked, the better the ad performed. The better the ad performed, the more Wish promoted it. And before long, the internet became flooded with bizarre Wish advertisements. People thought the company was making mistakes. In reality, the system was working exactly as intended. Wish had discovered one of the most effective attention machines ever built, and it was about to make Piotr look like a genius. Because while everyone laughed at the ads, the company was quietly becoming one of the biggest shopping platforms on Earth. What happened next would convince many people that rejecting Facebook had been the right decision. Then it would convince them that rejecting Amazon was the right decision too. But before Amazon entered the picture, there was something else nobody was paying attention to. A number hidden deep inside Wish's financial reports, a number so bad that if investors had focused on it sooner, the entire story might have ended very differently. That number was profit. Or more accurately, the complete lack of it. From the outside, Wish looked unstoppable. Users were arriving by the millions. Downloads were breaking records. Investors couldn't get enough. But behind the scenes, there was a problem growing almost as fast as the company itself. Losses. Huge losses. The kind of losses that become difficult to explain. At one point, Wish was effectively spending around $2 for every dollar it earned. Think about how insane that is. Most businesses lose money while they're growing. That's normal. But Wish had created a situation where growth itself was becoming the problem. Every new customer cost money. Every new advertisement cost money. Every new sale cost money. The company wasn't scaling toward profitability. It was scaling toward bigger losses. Yet investors kept funding it. Because there was one thing that made all those losses seem acceptable: growth. As long as the user numbers kept rising, nobody wanted to ask difficult questions. And the numbers were rising. Fast. By the late 2010s, Wish had become one of the most downloaded shopping apps in the world. Millions of new users were joining every month. The platform was available almost everywhere. The company was growing so quickly that it began attracting attention from some very powerful people, including Jeff Bezos. In 2016, Piotr received an invitation, not from just anyone, from Amazon. Specifically, Amazon headquarters. The details remain secret to this day. Non-disclosure agreements were signed, lawyers were present. Very little information ever became public. But according to multiple reports, the purpose of the meeting was obvious. Amazon wanted Wish. And honestly, it makes sense. At first glance, Wish looked like a joke. Weird products, strange advertisements, ridiculous prices. But Amazon wasn't interested in chicken helmets. It was interested in the machine behind them, the algorithm. The system that seemed capable of grabbing attention better than almost any company on the internet. And according to reports, Amazon was willing to pay around $10 billion to acquire it. $10 billion. For perspective, that's enough money to make multiple generations of a family wealthy. Enough money to guarantee complete financial freedom. Enough money that most founders wouldn't even need a second meeting. Yet Piotr walked away. And when news of the rejection began spreading, reactions were mixed. Some people thought he was a visionary. Others thought he had made the biggest mistake of his life. But then, something happened that made the decision look brilliant. Wish kept winning. Year after year, quarter after quarter. The growth continued. The company became one of the most downloaded shopping apps on the planet. Revenue surged. Users surged. Investors became even more confident. And then, another company reportedly approached Wish. Alibaba, one of the largest e-commerce businesses in the world. According to reports, they were also willing to pay around $10 billion. And once again, Piotr said no. 2 opportunities, $20 billion in total.
Rejected. At this point, you might wonder what he was thinking. Why refuse? Why take the risk? The answer appears to be surprisingly simple. He genuinely believed Wish could become much bigger. According to reports, Piotr believed the company could eventually reach $100 billion in annual sales. Not a $10 billion company, a $100 billion company. He wasn't trying to build a successful startup. He thought he was building the future of shopping. And honestly, for a while, the numbers seemed to support him. By 2018, Wish was exploding. Revenue had nearly doubled. The app became one of the most downloaded shopping platforms on Earth. Hundreds of millions of users were using the platform. Every year seemed bigger than the last. Investors started looking at the rejected Amazon offer differently. Maybe $10 billion really had been too low. Maybe Piotr had seen something everyone else missed. Then came the IPO. For startup founders, an IPO is one of the biggest moments imaginable. It's validation. It's proof that investors believe your company has a future. And when Wish finally went public, the market valued the company at over $14 billion. $14 billion. Suddenly, rejecting Amazon didn't seem crazy at all. It seemed genius. The company had become worth even more. On paper, Piotr had won. But there was one problem. The stock market cares about something that private investors often ignore. Eventually, it wants profits. And profits were still nowhere to be found. Investors began looking closer. They started asking difficult questions. Questions that had been ignored during the growth years. Questions like, why was customer retention so weak? Why were losses still enormous? Why did users leave so quickly? And most importantly, what exactly was keeping customers loyal to Wish? The answers weren't encouraging. Because the truth was that customers weren't loyal to Wish. They were loyal to low prices. And there's a massive difference between those two things. If customers love your brand, they stay. If customers love your prices, they leave the second someone offers something cheaper. And that became a huge problem. Because Wish had spent years teaching customers to chase bargains, not to trust the platform, not to love the brand, just to chase the next deal. At first, this weakness remained hidden. Then, the pandemic arrived. And suddenly, everything changed. At first, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. People were stuck at home, physical stores were struggling, online shopping was booming. For Amazon, it was incredible. For many e-commerce companies, it was a golden age. So naturally, Wish should have benefited too. Except it didn't. In fact, the pandemic ended up exposing one of the biggest weaknesses in the entire business model. The reason was surprisingly simple. Wish depended heavily on advertising. Almost everything flowed through advertising.
Customer acquisition, traffic, growth, everything. And during the pandemic, every business on Earth started fighting for those same advertisements. Restaurants, retailers, streaming services, tech companies, everyone. Advertising costs exploded. The exact strategy that had fueled Wish's rise suddenly became dramatically more expensive. And because Wish was already losing money, the effect was devastating. The machine that had driven years of growth was starting to break down. Customer acquisition became more expensive. Profitability became even further away. And investors began paying attention. For the first time, the growth story wasn't enough. People wanted answers. Unfortunately for Wish, another problem was about to emerge. A much bigger problem. Because while investors were starting to question the business, customers were starting to question the products. And what they discovered would trigger the beginning of the end. For years, people had joked about Wish. The strange products, the bizarre advertisements, the impossible discounts. But jokes are harmless.
What wasn't harmless were the growing number of complaints. Customers started posting photos online, products that looked nothing like their listings, items arriving broken, items arriving damaged, items arriving weeks late, sometimes months late, and in some cases, not arriving at all. At first, these stories seemed isolated. Every large marketplace has bad sellers. Amazon has them, eBay has them, even Walmart has them. The difference was scale. Wish had spent years prioritizing growth above almost everything else, and when growth becomes the main objective, quality control often suffers. The platform became flooded with merchants competing on one thing above all else: price. Not quality, not reliability, price. That created a dangerous incentive, because the easiest way to attract customers wasn't to offer a better product,
It was to offer a cheaper one. And eventually, some sellers started taking that idea to the extreme. One of the most common complaints involved misleading listings. A product image would show one thing. The customer would receive something completely different. Sometimes the product technically matched the description, but only if you read the fine print. For example, a listing might display a television. A customer assumes they're buying the television. But buried somewhere in the description is the truth. The product is actually a television stand, or a cable, or an accessory, not the television itself. Technically legal, practically deceptive. And the more stories surfaced, the more customer trust began to collapse. But what happened next was even worse. Because according to reports, one controversial seller account wasn't operated by an outside merchant at all. It was allegedly connected to Wish itself. The account was reportedly called Best Deal 9, and according to internal reports, its purpose wasn't simply selling products.
It was being used as an experiment designed to answer a disturbing question. What happens when customers never receive their orders? Would they complain? Would they request refunds? Would they notice? According to reports, some employees were horrified. Some allegedly pushed management to remove the account. Others reportedly described the project as unethical. Yet it remained active, and thousands of customers placed orders through it. Now, whether every detail of those reports is accurate or not, the damage was already done. Because perception matters, and by this point, the perception of Wish was becoming toxic. The company wasn't known for deals anymore. It was becoming known for disappointment. Customers who once laughed at Wish ads were now warning their friends not to use the platform at all. And unlike advertising problems, trust problems are extremely difficult to fix. You can spend money to buy advertisements. You can't buy credibility. Once it's gone, rebuilding it can take years. Years Wish didn't have. Because while the company was fighting its reputation crisis, another threat was quietly approaching. A competitor. And this competitor had studied Wish carefully. It had seen what worked. It had seen what failed. And it was about to use both. The company's name was Temu. When Temu launched, many people assumed it was just another discount shopping platform. At first glance, it looked familiar. Very familiar. Cheap products, aggressive marketing, huge discounts, endless advertisements. It almost felt like a newer version of Wish. But there was one crucial difference. Temu wasn't entering the market as an underdog. It was backed by enormous financial resources. Resources Wish simply couldn't match. And Temu moved fast. Very fast.
Within months, its advertisements were everywhere. Social media, Google, YouTube, television. Then came one of the clearest signals possible. The Super Bowl. Just a few months after launching in the United States, Temu was already running Super Bowl commercials. Millions of people saw the brand overnight. The message was clear. A new giant had arrived. And unfortunately for Wish, this giant was entering the exact market it depended on. Temu could spend more, advertise more, acquire customers faster. And unlike Wish, it was entering the game after watching years of mistakes unfold. The effect was brutal. Customers started leaving. Revenue declined. User growth slowed. Then it reversed entirely. The numbers became impossible to ignore. At its peak, Wish had over 100 million monthly active users. Then the decline started. One quarter, then another. The user base shrank dramatically. The company that once added tens of millions of users every year was suddenly struggling to keep the ones it already had. Investors noticed. Wall Street noticed. And the stock market responded exactly how you'd expect. It collapsed. The share price fell. Then it fell again. Then it kept falling. 90%, 95%, 99%. More than 99% of the company's market value disappeared. Think about how extraordinary that is. Imagine building a company worth billions, rejecting multiple acquisition offers, convincing the world that you're building the future, only to watch almost all of it vanish. By this point, layoffs were becoming common. Employees lost their jobs, executives departed. The optimism that once surrounded Wish had completely disappeared. The conversation was no longer about growth. It was about survival. And eventually, even survival became difficult. The company attempted a turnaround. New leadership arrived, the platform was redesigned, customer service was improved, policies changed. The company promised a fresh start. But there was a problem. Customers had already moved on. The internet rarely gives second chances, especially when alternatives exist. And alternatives existed everywhere. Amazon, eBay, Walmart, Temu, AliExpress.
customers had options. Why return to Wish? The answer, increasingly, was that they wouldn't. Then came the moment that effectively confirmed the end of the story. In 2024, Wish was sold. Not for $10 billion, not for $5 billion, not even for $1 billion. After rejecting Amazon, after rejecting Alibaba, after reaching a valuation above $14 billion, Wish was sold for approximately $173 million, a fraction of what it once could have been worth. One of the most dramatic declines in modern tech history. And when people hear that number, they usually focus on the money, the billions lost, the acquisition offers rejected, the stock market collapse. But that's not actually the most interesting part of the story. The most interesting part is why it happened. Because Piotr wasn't wrong about attention. In fact, he was probably ahead of his time. Wish understood attention better than almost anyone. The advertisements worked, the algorithm worked, the growth worked. Hundreds of millions of people downloaded the app. Millions clicked the ads. The internet couldn't stop talking about Wish. The company mastered attention. The problem was that attention and loyalty are not the same thing. Attention gets people through the door. Loyalty keeps them there. Wish built one of the most powerful attention machines on the internet. But somewhere along the way, it forgot to build trust. And when competitors arrived, when advertising became expensive, when customers started questioning the products, when investors started demanding answers, trust suddenly became the most important asset in the business. An asset Wish never really had.